The story I'm going to tell is an excerpt of a longer piece. The story's called Dancing Down Darkness. The girl loved to dance, and that is the hard bottom. I mean, you raise your hand in the air. Hallelujah, truth. When Liz was 10 and 11 months old, I put on Don McLean's record. Bye, bye, Miss American Pie, drive the Chevy to the levee and the levee is dry. And Lizzie would be bouncing and swaying. When she was 6 and 7 years old, she built herself a whole course of little kid-sized jumps in the front yard, and she and her dog Mal would go galloping, dancing, prancing over every one of them. And the harder Liz's life got, the harder she danced. When she was 14, her pony pitched her off into a jump, nearly broke her back. And that girl was in pain from that day on, and medications and doctors and surgeries, nothing touched it. What did that girl do with that pain? Best as she could, she shucked and jived it down. There was school. School was hard for Liz from the time she was 6 years old. In first grade, we had parent-teacher conferences, we had an outside tutor, and oh, the testing had begun. Liz would be 15 years old before all the varieties of dyslexia were correctly diagnosed. And by then it was too late. That girl hated school. She had a friend, Heather, and Heather and Liz had a bet. I wonder how much school we could skip and still graduate. And one night, Liz and Heather were out driving around. They had a tape of the Grateful Dead and the car stereo, and they had turned that music up, and those girls were jamming, they were singing along. They didn't want to come home, so Liz pulled into the Pony Club grounds. Those girls flung open the doors of the car. They were out of the car, their feet were pounding the ground. Hard times. There was the out of the blue death of Liz's dad. Dead of a heart attack when he was 53. Liz was 25, and her dad's death brought her to her knees. She loved her dad. It was a simple, uncomplicated love. She knew her dad loved her beyond all bounds. Whatever she dreamed, that man was rooting her on. His death nearly broke her, but she tried not to let on. Hey, Ma, she said, I inherited a couple things from Dad. I got his wicked sense of humor. And Ma, neither one of us got any use for authority. Oh, we won't tell the stories that go with that one. So, Liz went back to Evergreen State College out in Washington State after her dad's funeral. She was studying stream management, but when she was out of the field and the books were shut, the girl was out dancing. She'd be wearing her green hoodie, her cargo pants, her lace-up boots, and her chestnut hair would be swinging as she danced, and she might have been singing the Grateful Dead song that she had written out for her dad's funeral. Ripple on still water when no pebble has been tossed. If I knew the way, if I knew the way, I would take you home. Liz was not a sit on the couch, contemplate your navel kind of girl. She danced. But when she was 23 years old, 2 years before her dad died, she was in community college and she was redoing the same basic math course again and again and again and failing it every time. She was an unrelenting, would not quit back pain. She was stuck in Frederick. She couldn't imagine how she could become the person who was saving the wolves and saving the old growth forest and saving the creeks and the rivers. She decided, I'm driving my truck into a tree. And I can't imagine how small and dark her life must have seemed. But she didn't drive her truck into a tree. She came to me, she said, Ma, I'm not thinking right. I got her to the best therapist I knew, but that's not what really did the trick. The girl took on death another way. She decided she was going to have a 12-hour dance marathon on our farm. That's the way that girl kicked death in the teeth. She invited 3 bands. She invited 150 people. She called all of our neighbors, and they'd known her since she was 2.5, and so when she asked for permission, they said, honey, have your dance. The day of the dance arrived, and Liz had hung huge tie-dye banners from one side of the open barn doors to the other, and the bands were setting up in that old bank barn. It was vibrating. Car after car pulled up the lane. They had to get past me. I will see your ID, I said. If they weren't over 21, I sent them back down the lane. It was a good thing. Food was set out in the kitchen. Booze was in the bathtub beside the barn door. I thought those kids had a helium tank. I thought so what that green thing was. But it was this year that one of Liz's friends said to me, Mrs. G, how was laughing gas? I don't want to know where they got that, but it does explain the crazy wild giggling that started that party. They drank the booze, they hid the pot, but what counted was the dancing. Those kids were out in the field, their feet were flying, bodies boogieing down, arms raised in the air. And I looked at them and I thought, what you kids dancing for? Looks like freedom, looks like life, and anything else, you kids are dancing it down into the ground. Well, it got dark, and those kids shucked off their sandals and their shoes, and they came into the barn, and they started dancing on dusty, turning black, bare feet. They were shoulder to shoulder, they were hip to hip, they were slamming into each other. And there was Liz Gordon in the middle of them, chestnut hair swinging, rainbow-colored tie-dye t-shirt, Jerry Garcia written on the front, and khaki shorts, and a grin across her face. Woohoo! 1 o'clock in the morning, the police arrived. 3 patrol cars pulled up the lane, 3 sheriff's deputies got out, and they walked up to the barn. And Lizzie peeled herself away from that dance and went to talk to those deputies bold as brass. And they said to her, Mrs. Z called. Mrs. Z? That was a very cranky neighbor, kind of your 13th fairy kind of neighbor. But she lived 3 farms away. We hadn't thought to call her. And then the deputy said, Miss, this little party of yours, we can hear it from Mills on the hill. That was 2.5 miles away. But you know, they didn't pull anyone aside, they didn't stop the music, they didn't stop the dancing. All 3 of those cops standing there in light brown uniforms, a little gold trim on their shoulders. They had batons and pistols and pepper spray on their belts. But if you really looked, their handcuffs were swaying. All 3 of those cops were tapping their feet. They watched me at my post in the driveway. I'd been there a long time. I stopped every car heading down. I said, oh no, back in that field till morning. They said to Lizzie, turn it down a little. They said, we're going to tell Mrs. Z she can suck it up. And they left. And they never came back. And Lizzie, she kept dancing. She danced through all the good times. She kept trying to shuck and jive her way through that pain that never quit. But pain or not, you'd find that girl leaping in the air, dancing with joy. And dancing, that was that girl's mighty sword that she used to slay hopelessness. Thank you.